Welcome to Modern Jubilees. This is a review of the Exodus Decoded, a wonderful documentary from a few years ago. Here I'm going to go through the main points of this long documentary in brief, and a review for those who saw it, and a brief for those who did not. Part one is the Tempest Stela. So hidden in the basement of the Cairo Museum is an incredible large stela. This is a piece of stone that has hieroglyph carvings inside of it that tells a story of a great catastrophe that includes a great storm, darkness, and statues being thrown to the ground. It happens during the time of Pharaoh, whose name is Ahmose. And this happens during the Hyksos period in Avaris. So this happens in the area of the Nile Delta. And this is generally the area where the Israelites lived and where the story of the Exodus did take place. This is from around 1500 BCE, which is not far off from the estimates of when the Exodus occurred. Ahmose in Hebrew actually means brother of Moses. Musa in Arabic is Moses. Moshe in Hebrew, Moses in English. Ach is a brother. So very interesting that during this tempest, this tremendous tempest that they make this enormous rock to talk about, the name of the Pharaoh is Ahmose. Now, why is that interesting? Because Moses, if you recall the story, grows up with the man who becomes the Pharaoh, because Moses is adopted by the then Pharaoh's daughter, and then he grows up alongside who becomes the Pharaoh of the story of the Exodus. So he becomes known as Ahmose, brother of Moses. Apparently something unforgettable happens. Let's go to part two. This is of 15. Part two, Avaris, capital of the Hyksos, Tel El Daba. So who are these Hyksos people? What do we know about the Hyksos? The Hyksos come from the direction of Sinai. They come to Egypt and they rule over Egypt for a period of time before they are kicked out. Now this sounds an awful lot like the story from the Bible of the Israelites, and we don't have any alternative people that it could be who holds this story that they ruled over Egypt and then were kicked out. So this story is already starting to come together here. The capital of the Hyksos, Avaris, is in the area of the Nile Delta, which is known as Goshen in the Hebrew, the East Nile Delta specifically, as this is supposed to be the best part, and it's also the first part that they get to when they're coming from Israel. As a reminder, Joseph becomes the head, the second to the very top in Egypt, and then he invites his father and brothers to come down. They come down 70 people, and 70 men, and they start their families. They become eventually enslaved. The Egyptians are afraid that they are reproducing too fast, they're too successful, and so they enslave them by paying them less and less, and then eventually just treating them like slaves really, really badly until they are taken out by the mighty hand of God. So in ancient times, this capital of the Hyksos was around 600 acres. And there is something called the Beni Hassan tomb over there. It records the story of these people who come by way of Sinai and become rulers. They are called there the Amo, which in Hebrew is God's people, his people. And here we see pictures of women in very colorful dresses, and this would make sense in terms of the Israelites who did dress in colorful dresses. And also, interestingly, Joseph was known for having his Technicolor dream coat. All right, so this is a picture of the tomb. Part three, Jacob seals. There at this place are found 9 of these mud seals at this place called Avaris. It's the only instance where a Hebrew name is found on Pharaoh's seal. So apparently there was a Pharaoh, someone who ruled over Egypt, not necessarily a Pharaoh, but a ruler over Egypt who had a seal that would be stamped onto decrees. And there were 9 of these seals found that say on them, Jacob. And Yaakov is the name of the father of Joseph, and the father of, he was one of 12 sons. And so perhaps he gave one of these each to his brothers. Unclear, but this is really an incredible, incredible find. And there were 9 of these found at that place. by that capital. Part 4, Serabit el-khadim. So there is a mine in West Sinai where Egyptian slave labor worked in around that time. There is ancient Hebrew writing found there. So there are hieroglyphs, Egyptian, but there is also ancient Hebrew writing. You see it's a distinctive language, and it says things like God save me, God and Father in these mines in this ancient Hebrew. Part 5, the Santorini volcano eruption. This is a big one. So this is the first time I'm seeing this connection be made about the story of Exodus, but it's coming from Greece, which is right above Egypt. There are all these islands, and among those islands are the Santorini volcanoes, which mark the end of the Minoan civilization in around 1600 according to one group, or 1500s another group. There was an enormous volcano eruption. It was a catastrophe that matches the Tempest Stella in description and in time. And so this is a connection that's already being made independent of the whole story of the Exodus. This cataclysmic event would have been many times stronger than the atomic bomb. That's how serious this was. And it influenced hundreds of kilometers. There was pumice, which is volcanic stone and volcanic ash, found in Egypt by the Nile Delta. Santorini ash was found in the Nile Delta. They found 40 grains of whatever they looked at, and that was from around 1500 BCE. And it could have gotten there only through coming from this actual volcanic eruption, which is happening just north of Egypt, right? We're at the very top of Egypt, this whole story. So this is the Minoan eruption that devastated Thera. It's also known as that. Here's some pictures. So here we have Egypt. This is where the Nile Delta is. This is where the story of the Exodus is going to be taking place. And this is where the volcano would have been. It would have been enormous, happening under the ground as well. And so it is not far-fetched to say that this would have had an impact, as it was an absolutely enormous cataclysmic event, the Santorini, and this connection has already been made. This is what it would look like up close. Part 6. What are the effects of such an enormous volcanic eruption? And we learned this from a place called Lake Nyos, which is in Cameroon. There was an enormous volcanic eruption there. Not as enormous, but there was a large volcanic eruption there in 1984 and 1986. And specifically the 1986 one was worse, which is part of the story here too, that there are smaller eruptions that lead to an absolutely enormous eruption. So what happens in this eruption? Step 1 is the first step of this, of the fact that something is going very, very wrong, is that the water in the lake turned blood red. This bright, bright red. This is one picture. There are other pictures where it looks even more bright. There is a bright red rust color. Why is it rust? Because the iron is coming out of this gas. And when it mixes with oxygen at the surface of the lake, it creates this rust color. And it causes death of the fish. So what happens when all the fish die? They can't escape, so they die. But who can escape the water? The frogs. The frogs flee the water, and there would have been a infestation of frogs next to any water source that was affected by this gas leak. And so as it happens, as we're learning about the Exodus story, there are 10 plagues that come onto the Egyptians. And the first one is that the water turns to blood. And the second one is that there's an infestation of frogs. What are the next 3? Lice, flies, and epidemic that kills the animals. All this potentially caused by these gas leaks that are leading to an enormous volcanic eruption and the effect of small volcanic eruptions. Step 4, I'm not going to show you these pictures because they are absolutely horrendous, from Cameroon, are enormous boils and blisters that happen from the reduced circulation due to these gas leaks. And this was seen in the 1980s in Lake Nyos, Cameroon. You can look up the pictures if you really want to see, but they're really bad. And that is the next plague. So we have 1, blood, 2, frogs, 3, lice, 4, flies, 5, epidemic, 6, boils. And let's get to the next ones. Part 7 is fire and ice. So we had part 6, now we have part 7, and this corresponds to the 7th plague. Fire and ice. Ipawar papyrus talks of ice and fire together, which was a type of volcanic hail. So there's a papyrus from around 1250 BCE. It tells the story of some of these plagues, including mentioning the river turning to blood, and it talks about an ice and a fire together. Now, how does this happen? An ash cloud from the volcanic eruption traps the cloud moisture from the air. And this moisture from the air is now alongside this fire and ash that has come from the volcano. So along with ash and crystals, this leads to the hailstorm. All right, part 8, the final plagues. So the last 3 plagues, 8, 9, and 10. 8 is locusts. A cloud of some 40 to 80 million locusts are basically just how locusts get around. I've been among a storm of locusts in the desert, and they come in waves of an incredible amount of them, and they're very, very big. And they happen to be kosher, too. Earthquake storms, hail, and weather disruptions would lead to their movement. So all this crazy stuff going on would lead them to take off and look for a calmer place to be. And a final major volcanic eruption would lead to an enormous ash cloud 40 kilometers high, 200 kilometers across. The Bible calls it a palpable darkness. There would be ash everywhere, and the Santorini ash found in the Nile Delta confirms the ash did reach there. So this is the 9th, and then the 10th plague, which is here part 9, is the death of the firstborn. This is a picture here in the background of the son who died at 12 years old. His tomb, the son of Ahmose. His name was Prince Ahmose Sapphire. He is the eldest son of Ahmose. He died at age 12. Now, this death of the firstborn affected only the eldest sons, who were the heirs. And as part of their privilege, they slept on low beds while their siblings slept on rooftops. Now, they slept on these low beds, and that had an effect because the carbon dioxide gas turned into a rolling fog that moved across the land, just how, Israelites and Jews have imagined this plague as being a sort of fog rolling low on the ground. It's always been imagined that way, seen as the angel of death that's sort of moving in a low cloud. And this is exactly the physical thing that happened here, a fog rolling across the land that was full of carbon dioxide gas from the volcanic eruption that was happening, leading to lots of gas going off. That's what leads to the fire of the volcano. In 1986 in Lake Nyos, Cameroon, this fog killed 1,800 people. And in the documentary, you can see from a young woman who lost the large majority of her family. But those who slept on higher ground survived. And in Egypt, a mass grave of only males was found that apparently all died at the same time from some sort of plague. And this is the only one of all males. It's not usual for a plague to only affect males. Here it appears this has something to do with maybe where they slept, but also perhaps there is also miracle involved. I'll say that, for example, the plague of darkness, it's not mentioned in the documentary, but this apparently did not influence the Jewish people. And so how do you explain that exactly? It's not clear. But how they explained that this wasn't affecting them was that they were having their first Passover Seder. They were all sitting up at the table and having their first Passover Seder when this gas must have come over and killed the firstborns. It's trying to blend the archaeology and the geology and the history with the Bible, and there's also a lot of elements of miracle and God's hand in this that I want to put into this conversation. Part 10, the El Arish inscription. So here I put in the background, I'm not sure if you can see it so well, there's actually 2 sets of these. This is 3 waves that symbolize water, and there's one here too, although this one's a little bit more flat. Next to it are 2 knives, and this is extremely unusual to see something like this. 2 waters with 2 knives, symbolizing the parting of the Red Sea. This granite monument is in the Ismailia Regional Museum. Moses is called here the prince of the desert, and he is leader of the evil ones. And this would be the Egyptian perspective after all of these plagues. Parting of the sea at Piharotzi, Patufi, Marshi. So this is telling us in this granite monument, this El Arish inscription, it's telling us where the Red Sea would have been. And here it's actually the Reed Sea. Yam Suf in the Hebrew, Suf, we talk about Suf like the edge, but also Sufim are the reeds. And Tuf would be the Arabic word here apparently. And let's look here. Part 11, Lake Albala, just east of Goshen. So this is the area of Goshen. We have the location of the sea splitting according to the El Arish inscriptions that we just saw. So that one is talking about this terrible people led by this prince, right? And that makes sense because Moses was a prince of Egypt. Lake Albala, where God devoured or swallowed, is right here, Lake Bala. And it's right up here, and so it would have been affected by the volcanic eruptions. There was an intermingling of salt marshes, sweet waters, and reeds. Soil was moving down in waves due to the volcanic eruption, creating dry land crossings. Tsunami tidal waves, half the height of the Empire State Building, would have come towards Egypt. And this marked the start of their journey as they were leaving Egypt. I don't know exactly where they were starting from, but according to this documentary, they come to Lake Bala, which is now dried up due to the Suez Canal. But there was a big lake here, Lake Bala, and that means in Hebrew, devoured or literally swallowed. So perhaps God swallows here the Egyptian army, which is essentially what happens in the story. And this seems a bit close to home, but it's unclear where they were leaving from. And so it is definitely a possibility. And so this is the connection that's made in this documentary. Part 12, Santorini map under ash, 1500 BCE. In the background here, you see what's referred to as the oldest map. And it's bigger than what we see here, but we see all this beauty. This was discovered under ash left over from a volcanic eruption. But this was discovered in 1972. There was this discovery of an ancient map that linked Greece and Egypt, showed a beautiful map linking Greece and Egypt. And in Egypt, you see there is a port city of Avaris. So there was a voyage that was talked about from Egypt to Santorini. So under all the ash doesn't mean that it is from exactly before this volcanic eruption. It could be from around that time, but apparently this is from around 1500 BCE is what we know. Talks about a voyage of people who make their way to Greece. And so it's basically saying that Egypt had the strongest relations at the time with Greece. And so there was a strong history of trade between the two places. I'm not saying that, and I don't think they're saying that the people in this picture or the people who drew this picture are necessarily Israelites in any way, but it could be. But either way, after the splitting of the sea, some people may have found their way to Greece after the splitting of the sea, going north, and perhaps those are the people who had the strongest relations with Greeks. They made a voyage to Santorini. Apparently this was normal as there was trade between Greece and ancient Egypt from the port city of Avaris, which is portrayed in these pictures. Greek Minoans lived in Egypt as traders, and Egyptians apparently lived in Greece, right? That's what it is to be a trader, with a D, trader. Egyptian swords and gold treasures from the Exodus were found in this area. So in this area of Santorini, there are a lot of gold treasures that are discovered, and there are tombs there right by a large mountain shaped as a pyramid. And these tombs that are there have gravestones. They have a clear map of the Exodus story on them. And so Homer, that's a typo, Homer called those who were buried in these Mycenae, this area where a lot of people were buried, they call them, he calls them Danoi. And this may be related to the tribe of Dan. We're going to revisit this later. how this all connects with Greece. Now, these Mycenae tombstones, known as the grave stele, there is a grave monument that shows Egyptian chariots chasing Moses or a person, and then getting swallowed by the sea. There are 3 of these steles. You see water above and water below, water coming down. You see Moses running forward. Then he turns around and you see the chariot sinking. And in the 3rd one, which is hidden away and not available for people to see, but it's known what's on it, these chariots are overturned. And we have some images of those. So they get swallowed by the sea, and this is clearly the story of what happened to the Egyptians as the Israelites were running away. So this is in the National Archeological Museum of Greece. Part 14, the Mountain of God. So this is Egypt. This is the Sinai Desert. Here in Egypt, we would have been around here. This would have been the sea that was crossed. And then perhaps some people went north if they had some Greek friends with boats and they wanted to go north. But the rest of the Israelites continue, and it's unclear exactly which way they go. We know they don't go north because we're told that God wants them to avoid the Philistines, who are very brutal, and God didn't want them to have to go to war just as they're coming out of slavery. And so God takes them around another way. Now, where is this mountain of God? The documentary uses a few criteria in order to find where it could be. And they're coming up with this area, which I like this idea because it is still in the Sinai, which we know it has been called Sinai for so long. So newer ideas that it might be around here were alternative. And so the idea that it could be here is interesting. So this is a place called Jabal Hashem El Tarif, and there is a holy mountain there marked by the largest concentration of what's called open-air rock sanctuaries, where there is a holy place. There are these ancient rock sanctuaries made, and the largest concentration is by this holy mountain around here. There is a 200-meter plateau. There's a mountain 200 meters above a surrounding large plateau that could have hosted all these people. And there is a cleft in the rock, a natural podium, which would have been an amphitheater for Moses. There are grave sites of holy men on its summit, and there is evidence of water on top of the mountain, which helps to understand how Moses was there working so hard, writing down the 10 Commandments, learning the Bible, getting the Book of Jubilees from the angel, and spending all this time above this mountain. Reminder that that Moses grew up, right, in the Pharaoh's house. He grew up as a prince, but then he started to feel bad for his brethren, the Israelites who were enslaved. He ended up running away to Midian, where he worked and found his wife and got married. These are the forefathers, the Midianites are the forefathers of the Druze, which is why they continue to be a strong ally of Israel. And so Moses marries into this family, but he goes back and says, "Let my people go," and then takes them back. So he knows this area well because he ran away to this area. So he takes them, and apparently this experience happens around here. There's evidence of water atop this mountain. There's travertine indicating calcium, indicating an ancient spring. And part 15, last part, in the Mycenae, these people who lived in this area of Greece, they're called the Danoi by Homer. And so if, let's say, they were descendants of the tribe of Dan who left after the splitting of the sea, they went north there, they took ships with their Greek friends and they went there. They would have taken, right, when the Israelites were coming out of Egypt, they went with a lot of gold. The Egyptians gave them their gold and said, "Go." And this made up for many years of slavery in a way, but either way, they said, "Leave." And so we have tons of gold, beautiful, beautiful items from the Mycenoi. And the tribe of Dan are also those who helped to craft the golden ark and the tabernacle. And in the tabernacle, there are images of winged lions. So it's possible that they then rejoined the Israelites after spending some time in Greece. It's unclear exactly what the story is, but there does seem to be some sort of connection. Excuse me. And here we have in this museum in Greece an ornament, besides for the crown, besides for the washing cups and these kelim, these vessels. We have this special ornament. There are 3 of these that we see. Who knows if there were more that were found? There were 3 of these that were found, and they're apparently ornaments that were hung from clothing. They would have been hung from priests' clothing. What we see here is clearly the top of an altar where an animal, for example, would have been sacrificed, and then the blood would have been put on the 4 horns. This was part of the tradition in Israel, and it's a very, very ancient tradition. Noah, when he comes off the ark, gives a sacrifice, and Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve's children, gave the first sacrifices. So giving an offering to God is a very, very traditional thing. But here we have something special. And what we see here is, first of all, it's an ornament. So who would wear this and why? Apparently it's a priestly thing. It's got this altar. Here we see steps. And according to the hypothesis in this documentary, this is what the Ark of the Covenant looked like, with the large winged birds on top of it, which is what we know to be on top of it. Some sort of cherubs, perhaps a cherub face, but winged creatures were atop the Ark of the Covenant, and this would have been the perspective from inside the Holy of Holies looking out. And so you would have seen the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant, and behind it there would have been curtains, but this is a visual that only really Moses or the high priest like Aaron would have seen. And so it's fascinating. It's a fascinating discovery, and that is what the documentary ends with. And that is a review of the entire documentary. We went through each part, and I hope that this was interesting for you, that we learned something together. Santorini volcano eruption, a large part, apparently, of the story of the Exodus and the Exodus Decoded. Hope you enjoyed. This is Modern Jubilees, and we will see you next time.